In the quiet hospital room, Mrs. Han sat quietly by the bed, her trembling hands gently placed on the thin blanket covering Mr. Phat. The steady sound of the ventilator harmonized with the slow heartbeat displayed on the screen, like a sad song gradually ending. The soft yellow light shone on his gaunt face, a man who was once strong and proud, now just a worn-out figure lying motionless. For 25 years, Mrs. Han had taken care of him as an inseparable part of her life, but now she understood that the journey was coming to an end. Mr. Phat could no longer fend for himself, nor did he complain about the food she cooked. The man who used to be the pillar of the family now lay there, silently facing his final days. Mrs. Han looked at him, her eyes heavy. She never thought she would be attached to one job for more than 2 decades. From an ordinary worker, without a degree or special skills, she struggled everywhere to make a living, just hoping to bring her children a better future. When she stepped into Mr. Phat's house, she only saw it as a temporary job. But there are paths that, once chosen, there is no turning back. Outside, the night falls, the sound of car horns echoes from afar, the city is still bustling as usual. But in the small room, time seems to stop. No one knows that next to Mr. Phat is a woman who has accompanied him for more than 25 years. Not a relative, but more attached than anyone. She gently stroked his hand, her callous finger sliding over his wrinkled skin that gradually cooled. A stream of memories rushed back, bringing her back to the first day she set foot in that house. Over 40 years old, Mrs. Han was then a struggling woman in the middle of a splendid city. She used to work as a seamstress, but her meager salary was not enough to support her children. Her husband, a mechanic, was covered in oil every day, but his income could not cover their living expenses. The couple looked at each other, helpless before the uncertain future. The pressure grew as the children grew up. Tuition fees increased and living expenses increased. She could not continue doing unstable jobs. She needed a stable support. No matter how hard it was, she would be content. But life was not easy. A middle-aged woman with no qualifications, no experience, had difficulty finding a decent job. She knocked on doors everywhere, from companies to factories, but only received cold headshakes. Then, one day, through an acquaintance's introduction, she was offered a job taking care of a rich old man who lived alone. The job required her to stay at home, cooking, doing laundry, and chatting with him. The salary was much higher than what she had done before, but it also required great sacrifice. She hesitated. She had never taken care of anyone outside her family, worried that she could not handle it, afraid that her boss would be difficult. But looking back at her precarious life, she decided to try. The first day she entered Mr. Phat's house, she felt like she was lost in another world. The house was large, luxurious, but cold and stifling. The high walls and expensive furniture could not hide the emptiness. In the middle of that space was Mr. Phat, an old man with cold, silent eyes. He did not welcome, did not smile, only left a short message from his son. "Just do your job well. My father does not like trouble." In the first days, she felt lost. Mr. Phat did not talk, did not ask for anything other than the basics. He was not unpleasant, but not friendly either. To him, she was just a strange employee. As time passed, she gradually got used to the silence. She worked diligently, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. Mr. Phat often sat quietly in an armchair near the window, his eyes distant. She was not used to this atmosphere. Before, no matter what she did, she always had colleagues to talk to and laughter despite her fatigue. But here, there was only her and a quiet old man. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare meals, put them on the table, and quietly left. Some days he ate everything. Some days the food was cold. She did not know what she did wrong, but she did not give up. This was not just a job, but the only chance for her to stabilize her life. Gradually, she observed and adapted. Mr. Phat did not like to be disturbed, but had clear habits. He liked green tea in the morning, no sugar, not strong. He hated greasy food and preferred light dishes. She noticed that he often sat looking at the small garden behind the house, his eyes no longer serious, but filled with deep sadness. She didn't ask, just silently remembered and did better. Then one day, while she was cooking, a hoarse voice rang out, "Auntie, make the porridge a little thinner." She turned around in surprise and saw him standing at the kitchen door, leaning on his cane. It was the first time he had taken the initiative to talk to her in many weeks. From then on, the distance between them gradually narrowed. He no longer ignored her. No. When she served the meal, he nodded in thanks. When she helped him out onto the porch to get some fresh air, he didn't refuse, but that was all. She didn't know about his past, nor did she dare ask. Until one afternoon, while she was pruning the dead trees in the garden, he suddenly said, "This place used to grow apricot flowers. My wife loved yellow apricot flowers, and she took care of them herself every Tet." She was speechless. This was the first time he mentioned his wife. "After she passed away, I didn't want to grow apricot flowers anymore. But now, looking back, it feels so empty," he said, then turned back into the house, leaving her with a jumble of thoughts. From then on, she understood him better. He was not cold, he was just used to living with loneliness, to the point of not wanting to open his heart. As time passed, he trusted her more. When she brought him tea, he did not turn away. When she adjusted her scarf on cold days, he did not wave her hand. One day, his son came to visit a busy man, confident in his demeanor, but distant from his father. The conversation was short and cold. After he left, he said, "My son is very busy." Just one sentence, but she understood the sadness he was hiding. She began to care more about him, not just as a worker, but as a friend. She got up early to cook healthy dishes for him and chatted about the little things out there. He rarely responded, but she knew he was listening. One day, he suddenly said, "Next year, Tet, you should plant apricot trees again." For the first time in many years, she saw his eyes change. No longer cold, only sincerity. To her, that was a sign that she was no longer a hired hand, but had become a part of this place. Mr. Phat's health gradually weakened. His persistent cough, slow steps, he needed more help from her. However, he still liked to sit on the porch looking at the young apricot tree she planted. Then one day, he fell in the living room. She quickly helped him up and called an ambulance. The doctor concluded that he had severe heart failure and advised the family to prepare mentally. His children came, but they were busy. They just stopped by and left. Only she stayed, staying by his bedside, taking care of him with every meal, of porridge, every pill of medicine. One day, he said, "I used to not like anyone living in the house, but now I'm used to it." Just a few words, but to her, it was the most sincere admission. He passed away peacefully one night, as gentle as a breeze. She sat next to him, not crying, just holding his hand one last time, and then letting go. The 25-year journey ended. After the funeral, his son gave her an envelope of money, his last wish. She refused. To her, his trust and respect for her was the greatest gift. She left that house, returned to her hometown, and lived peacefully with her children and grandchildren. But every Tet she missed the apricot tree in the yard. The tree was still blooming, as he once said. This year's apricot blossoms are so beautiful. Even though he was gone, her memories of him remained with her, along with that apricot tree. Mrs. Han returned to her hometown, the place she had left in her youth to make a living. The small house was still there, simple but warm, as if embracing her after so many days apart. Her children and grandchildren often visit, bringing with them bustling stories from the city. She is no longer busy with worries, no longer has sleepless nights because of work. Her life, after many years of hardship, has finally found a peaceful place. But in that serenity, she still feels a void that is hard to name. Every morning, she wakes up early, makes a pot of hot tea, sits on the porch, and watches the first rays of the morning sun. That habit has been ingrained in her life for more than 2 decades with Mr. Phat. There are nights when she wakes up suddenly, thinking she still needs to go into the room to check if he slept well. In the quiet afternoons, she remembers the moment when the two of them used to sit on his porch, saying nothing, but still understanding each other through the silence. That memory does not fade, but creeps into every corner of her mind like an indelible part. One day in early spring, when she was watering the flower pots in the front yard, a car stopped in front of the gate. She looked up, slightly surprised to see Mr. Phat's 2 sons coming down. They were still elegant, still busy, but today their eyes were a bit calmer. She invited them into the house, pouring tea as usual. They did not come for money, nor did she mention the money Mr. Phat left behind. Aunt Han, the eldest son, said, his voice warmed, "We want to visit home. Before he passed away, Dad told us to come back in the spring to see how the apricot tree blooms this year." She was speechless. The apricot tree, the symbol of the years she and Mr. Phat spent together, was still there in the house she had considered a part of her life. They did not force her to make an immediate decision, only leaving a sincere invitation. She thought for a long time. Finally, one morning at the beginning of the year, she got in the car and returned to the city. The house was still the same, but Mr. Phat was no longer sitting on the porch, no longer the thin figure leaning on a wooden chair sipping tea. She walked out to the backyard where the apricot tree she planted years ago had grown big, its branches spreading out. The bright yellow flowers were blooming, falling sporadically to the ground. She stood still, her heart filled with indescribable emotions. She remembered the first day she met him, a man who was aloof and quiet. She remembered the times he nodded in thanks when she served the meal. She remembered the afternoons they both watched the sunset. And the last spring, when he slowly said, "This year's apricot blossoms are so beautiful." Those memories were as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The spring breeze blew gently through the yard, carrying the gentle scent of apricot blossoms. She reached out to touch the tree trunk, feeling the rough bark under her fingers. Time passed quickly, but what she and he had shared was still here in every petal, every breeze. "Aunt Han, this year's apricot blossoms are blooming beautifully." A gentle voice rang out behind her. She turned around and saw Mr. Phat's son standing there, his face no longer longer cold but more approachable. Your father will definitely be very happy, he continued, his eyes on the apricot tree. She nodded slightly. Mr. Phat was not a talkative person, but through his small actions he left a deep impression. Now he is gone, but his legacy lives on through this apricot tree. Mr. Phat's daughter stepped forward and placed a pot of hot tea on the stone table. Aunt Han, I will make tea the way you always did for Dad, she said. She looked at the clear cup of green tea, the smoke rising gently, carrying a familiar scent. She sat down, lifted the cup of tea, and felt the warmth spread in her hand. For more than 25 years, she had made tea for him every day. Now, holding that cup of tea again, she realized that even if everything changed, the things she was attached to would never be lost. She took a sip. The taste was still the same. The only difference was who was drinking it. After the visit, she did not stay long. She knew that this place was no longer her place. Her life had turned to a new chapter. But before leaving, she went to the Tet flower market, picked a small apricot branch to bring back to her hometown. She did not want to replace the old apricot tree. She just wanted to keep a part of her memory of Mr. Phat, of the past days. Every morning, she watered and cared for the young tree, just like she did at his house. Neighbors asked, "Why do you plant apricot trees when you have always liked orchids?" She smiled gently. Because of a promise. She did not say it clearly, but in her heart, it was a promise to Mr. Phat, to herself, that what she cherished would remain forever. One day, at the end of the year, the familiar car stopped in front of the gate. Mr. Phat's 2 children brought Tet gifts. "Aunt Han, we came to visit you," they said. She smiled to welcome them. They did not come out of responsibility, but out of affection. Over the years, she was not just a maid, but had become a part of their family. That Tet, they invited her to the city. She entered the old house, now warmer because of the presence of people who knew how to appreciate each other. Mr. Phat's grandchildren ran to greet her, calling her by affectionate names. On the living room table, a photo of Mr. Phat was placed next to a teapot and a box of Tet jam. She looked at him and said softly, "This year's apricot blossoms are very beautiful, Mr. Phat." No one heard, but she believed he understood. Mrs. Han's 25-year journey is not only a story of devotion, but a lesson about humanity, attachment, and values that transcend material things. Happiness sometimes does not lie in what we receive, but in what we give with all our heart. She gave everything, and now she received complete peace. After that Tet, Mrs. Han returned to her hometown, carrying with her an indescribable feeling of relief. The small house where she was born and raised has now become a truly peaceful place. Every day she lives slowly, enjoying the simple moments that she rarely had time to pay attention to before. In the morning she makes tea, sits on the porch watching the young apricot tree grow under the spring sunshine. In the afternoon, she goes to the market, cooks simple dishes, sometimes the dishes that Mr. Phat used to like, even though now no one waits for her to serve them. She is not lonely. Her children and grandchildren still visit, bringing laughter and family warmth. But deep in her heart, she knows that a part of her memories is still anchored in the old house, where the big apricot tree still blooms every spring. As time passes, the apricot tree in front of Mrs. Han's house begins to sprout and grow strong branches. Looking at it, she seems to see the image of the apricot tree in Mr. Phat's yard, a symbol of the years she spent devoting herself to someone who is not her blood relative. Once, a curious neighbor asked, "Aunt Han, why do you take such good care of the apricot tree? Does it have any special meaning to you?" She just smiled and replied softly, "It is a memory." She didn't say much, but in her heart, the apricot tree was more than just a tree. It was a reminder of devotion, of humanity, and of a promise she told herself she would keep forever. One late spring afternoon, as she sat knitting on the porch, a familiar car appeared at the gate. Mr. Phat's 2 children got out, holding a few simple gifts. "Aunt Han, we came to visit you," the eldest son said, his voice warm. She stood up, welcoming them with a gentle smile. They sat in the small house around the tea she had just made. This time, they didn't mention the apricot tree or the old house. They told her about their lives, their busy work, their daily pressures, and even the times when they suddenly missed their father. "Once I passed by the old house, saw the apricot tree blooming so beautifully, and suddenly I missed my father," Mr. Phat's daughter said, her eyes slightly sad. Mrs. Han listened, not saying much, just nodding slightly. She understood that feeling, the longing for someone who had passed away, but still left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who remained. The conversation lasted until dusk. Before leaving, the eldest son placed a small box on the table. "Aunt Han, this is some tea that my father likes. We think it would be better for you to keep," he said. She looked at the box, her heart suddenly warmed. It was the green tea that Mr. Phat drank every morning, the kind she had brewed every day for 25 years. She accepted it without refusing as a way to preserve the remaining memories. From then on, the visits of Mr. Phat's 2 children became a part of Mrs. Han's life. They did not come often, but each time they stopped by, they were filled with sincerity. Gradually, she realized that she was not only the one who had taken care of Mr. Phat, but also a bridge between him and his children, those who had been separated from their father by the hustle and bustle of life. Through her, they found pieces of their father that they had never fully understood when he was alive. Once, Mr. Phat's daughter confided, "Aunt Han, when I was little, I didn't see my father much. When I grew up, I was busy and didn't have time to talk. Now that I think about it, I feel sorry. Luckily, you told us about him." She just smiled and replied, "He didn't talk much, but he loved you very much." The following spring, her 2 children invited her to the city again. This time, they organized a small family meal at the old house. When she entered, the atmosphere was no longer as cold as before. Mr. Phat's grandchildren ran out, chattering and asking her all sorts of questions. On the dining table, the dishes she had cooked for Mr. Phat were displayed, not by her, but by his daughter, prepared according to what she had told them. "Aunt Han, I learned how to cook thin porridge from you. I don't know if it's the same," she said with a smile. She tasted it and nodded. "It's very similar. Mr. Phat will probably like it." After the meal, everyone went to the backyard, where the apricot tree was now tall, with a wide canopy covered with bright yellow flowers. A breeze blew by and the petals fell to the ground. Mrs. Han stood still, looking at the apricot tree, her heart filled with emotion. Her eldest son walked up to her and said gently, "Aunt Han, we intend to keep this house, not sell it, so that every year we can come back here, look at the apricot tree and remember Dad, and remember you too." She turned around and saw his sincere eyes. She did not answer, just nodded slightly, but in her heart she knew that she had truly become a part of this family. Time continued to pass. Mrs. Han still lived peacefully in the countryside. The apricot tree in front of her house bloomed every year as a reminder of the days gone by. Mr. Phat's 2 children occasionally visited, bringing new stories and small gifts. Gradually, they came not only because of their father's memories, but also because of her, the woman who silently connected them to the past, to the values they had missed. One spring morning, while she was sitting sipping tea on the porch, the phone rang. Her eldest son called. "Aunt Han, come with us this Tet. The children want to see Grandma Han." She laughed. The name Grandma Han that the children gave her was now familiar. She agreed. That year, she entered the old house again, which was now filled with laughter and family warmth. On the altar, Mr. Phat's photo was still there, his eyes quietly looking at her. She poured a cup of tea, placed it in front of his photo, and said softly, "The plum blossoms this year are still beautiful, Mr. Phat. Don't worry." Mrs. Han's life, from a simple woman struggling to make a living, has become a meaningful journey. 25 years with Mr. Phat was not just a job, but a journey of humanity, of silent sacrifice and respect. She did not seek anything for herself, but in the end, she received a family not by blood, but by heart. That spring, Mrs. Han set foot in Mr. Phat's old house again, which was no longer a cold space, but had become a gathering place filled with laughter. The little grandchildren, the children of Mr. Phat's 2 children, ran out to hug her, calling "Grandma Han" in a clear voice. She smiled, patted their heads, and felt an unusually warm feeling welling up in her heart. On the altar, Mr. Phat's photo was still there, her calm eyes following every moment. She poured a cup of tea, placed it in front of his photo, and whispered, "The plum blossoms this year are still beautiful, Mr. Phat. The children are growing up so fast. Don't you see?" Even though no one could hear, she believed that somewhere he was still smiling. The Tet meal was carefully prepared, not too elaborate, but full of family. Mr. Phat's daughter brought out a bowl of thin porridge, the dish she used to cook for him every day, and said with a smile, "Aunt Hen, I practiced for a long time to make it like this. Try it and see if it's similar." She picked up the spoon, took a sip. The light flavor reminded her of the old days. "Very similar," she nodded. If Mr. Phat were still here, he would probably say it was delicious. The whole family burst into laughter, the atmosphere filled with closeness. She sat among the children, telling them stories about her grandfather, not the stern Mr. Phat and their distant memories, but the quiet old man who liked to sit on the porch, watching the apricot tree and sipping tea. After the meal, everyone went to the backyard, where the apricot tree had now become the symbol of the house. The apricot branches stretched out, bright yellow flowers covering the tree canopy, falling sporadically to the ground whenever the wind blew. The eldest son stood next to her, thoughtful. "Aunt Han, we have decided to renovate the house, to make it a weekend retreat for the whole family. This apricot tree will be the center, so that every spring we will remember Dad and the days you were here." She looked at him, then turned to the apricot tree and nodded slightly. "Mr. Phat would probably want that too," she said, her voice gentle. The days in the city passed quickly. Before returning to her hometown, Mrs. Han spent some time walking around the house as if wanting to remember every little corner. The room where Mr. Phat spent his last months was still there, now cleaned and more airy. The wooden chair he used to sit on the porch was now repainted, neatly placed under the apricot tree. She stood still for a moment, suddenly remembering the silent afternoons with him, no words, just each other's presence. When leaving, the daughter slipped a small gift bag into her hand. "Aunt Hen, some tea and jam I made." When you come back to your hometown, enjoy it. She took it and smiled. Thank you. Next time I come, I will bring some gifts from the countryside for you. Returning to her small house in the countryside, Mrs. Han continued her simple life. The apricot tree in the front yard grew bigger and bigger, blooming brilliantly every spring, like a silent friend accompanying her. She still made tea every morning, still took care of the plants, but now she no longer felt empty. The visits from Mr. Phat's 2 children, handwritten letters from her grandchildren, and even unexpected calls to ask about her filled the void in her heart. They came not only because of memories of their father, but because of her, the woman who had become an indispensable part of their family. One day, in the middle of summer, while she was sitting knitting under the tree in front of the house, a car stopped. The eldest son got out, this time alone. He sat down next to her, his voice warm. Aunt Han, I just went on a business trip across the city and stopped by to visit you on the way. How are you doing? She smiled gently. Very well, my child. And you? How is your work? He nodded, then took a small box from his pocket. Aunt Han, this is a gift for you. A small teapot, for your convenience. She took it, opened it to look. The pot was pretty, fit her hand, reminded her of the days when she made tea for Mr. Phat. Thank you, she said, her eyes shining with joy. The conversation lasted until the afternoon sun faded. Before leaving, he hesitated. Aunt Han, I want to ask you something. Back then, why didn't you accept the money your father left? I know you worked hard. You should have kept it. She looked at him, then turned to the apricot tree and slowly replied, I don't need money, my child. During the years with your father, I learned that there are things more precious than money. Trust, sincere feelings. For me, that is enough. He was silent, his eyes slightly moved. You're right, he said softly. My dad is lucky to have you by his side. From then on, the bond between Mrs. Han and Mr. Phat's family grew stronger. Every spring, she went to the city, bringing some gifts from the countryside, homemade banchung, homemade ginger jam, to gather with them around the apricot tree. As the children grew older, they began to understand more about the story of their One time, the eldest grandchild asked, Grandma Han, why are you not tired of being with Grandpa for so long? She smiled and patted his head. Because I love him, and he loves me too in his own way. There are things that don't need to be said, just felt. Mrs. Han's life, from an ordinary woman struggling to make a living, has become a meaningful journey. 25 years with Mr. Phat is not just a time of work, but a journey of sacrifice, devotion, and deep humanity. She did not ask for anything for herself, but in the end, she received a family, not of blood, but of heart. Every time she saw the apricot tree in front of her house bloom, she thought of Mr. Phat, of the old house, and of the people who now considered her family. She knew that, no matter how much time passed, what she gave would remain forever. Time passed, and Mrs. Han still lived peacefully in her small house in the countryside, where the apricot tree in the front yard had grown tall and was full of yellow flowers every spring. The visits from Mr. Phat's 2 children were no longer unexpected, but became a familiar part of her life. They brought their grandchildren, brought new stories, and sometimes simply sat with her over a pot of tea, chatting about the past. Through each meeting, she realized that she was not only the person who had taken care of Mr. Phat, but had become a spiritual support for their whole family, someone who connected them to the past, to the values they had unintentionally missed. One day in early autumn, while she was sweeping the yard, a familiar car stopped. Mr. Phat's daughter got out, this time with her husband and 2 small children. Aunt Han, we're here to visit you, she said, smiling brightly. She welcomed them into the house and made tea as usual. The children ran around the yard, happily looking at the apricot tree and asking her all sorts of questions. Grandma Han, this tree must have been this big for a long time, right? When did you plant it? She smiled gently and replied, since you left my grandfather's house and came here. It grew up with your memories. The child nodded. Although she didn't understand everything, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity. The girl sat down next to her, her voice low. Aunt Han, a few days ago I was cleaning out the old house and found a small box from Dad. Inside were a few handwritten letters, written to us when we were little, but Dad never sent them. I read them and felt sorry. Dad didn't talk much, so we didn't know what he was thinking. There was one letter that mentioned you. She was a little surprised and looked up. How could a letter mention you? She took a yellowed piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to her. Read it, she said. Mrs. Han held the letter, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Phat's handwriting was firm, even though the ink had faded. The letter was not long, just a few lines. Children, if you have the chance in the future, please thank Aunt Han on behalf of Dad. She not only worked, but also gave Dad a friend. Dad is not good at saying loving words, but she understands. Don't let life take away the important things. She finished reading, speechless, her eyes blurred, not because of sadness, but because of a feeling of warmth. Mr. Phat had never said these words when he was alive, but through his handwriting, she knew he had cherished her more than she had thought. And Han, I didn't expect Dad to write like that, the daughter said, her voice choked. We grew up, got busy, and paid little attention to Dad. Now that I've read the letter, I understand how lonely Dad was and how you were there for him. I thank you, not only for Dad, but for us too. She put the letter down, smiling. I didn't do anything big, my child. I just stayed by his side as he stayed by my side. She held her hand, squeezing it gently as a wordless thank you. From that day on, Mr. Phat's family cherished Mrs. Han even more. They not only saw her as someone who had taken care of their father, but also as a real member of the family. Every holiday, they welcomed her to the city and gathered together in the old house that had now been renovated. The apricot tree in the yard was still the focal point, blooming every year as a testament to the strong bond between her and the family. As the children grew up, they began to ask her more about their grandfather, not only through their parents' stories, but also through Mrs. Han's own vivid stories. Another spring came, and Mrs. Han went to the city again at the invitation of her family. This time, they held a small ceremony under the apricot tree to commemorate Mr. Phat. On the stone table, in addition to a pot of tea and tet jam, there was also a small photo frame of him placed next to a few freshly picked apricot branches. The eldest son stood up, his voice warm. Today we want to thank Dad and thank Aunt Han. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't know how Dad lived, what he cherished. This apricot tree, this house, it's thanks to you that we're still able to keep it. Everyone clapped, the children cheered, but she just sat quietly, her eyes shining with simple joy. After the ceremony, Mrs. Han went out to the yard, stood under the apricot tree, watching the scattered petals fall. The daughter walked over and said gently, Aunt Han, I plan to write a small book telling the story of you and Dad, not to sell, just to keep as a souvenir for the children in the future. Do you think so? She looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled. If you want, then do it, but don't tell too much about you. Telling about him is enough, she nodded. I will tell both of them because this story is not complete without you. When returning to her hometown, Mrs. Han brought with her a sense of peace. Her life from the days of hardship had become a meaningful journey. 25 years with Mr. Phat was not just a time of working, but a journey of humanity, attachment, and respect. She did not seek fame or rewards, but in the end, she received a family, not by blood, but by heart. Every time she saw the apricot tree in front of her house blooming, she remembered Mr. Phat, the quiet days together, and the people who now considered her the most beloved. After that spring, Mrs. Han returned to her hometown with a light and peaceful heart. Her small house was still simple, but now it was not only a place to live, but also a place to keep beautiful memories of a long journey. The apricot tree in the yard grew bigger, and every spring it bloomed with bright yellow flowers as a reminder of the years she had lived her life for others. She still keeps the habit of making tea every morning, sitting on the porch watching the sun, but now she no longer feels any emptiness. Visits from Mr. Phat's family, handwritten letters from her grandchildren, and even unexpected phone calls have become a source of warmth in her old age. One early winter day, while she was sitting in the sun in the front yard, a familiar car stopped. Mr. Phat's eldest son got out, holding a small hardcover book in his hand. Aunt Han, I brought this for you to see, he said, smiling brightly. She took the book, curiously opening it. On the cover were the simple words, My Van No. Below was the name of Mr. Phat's daughter, the author. She flipped through the pages, seeing the lines telling the story of her and Mr. Phat, from the first day she entered the cold house until the last springs under the apricot tree. Not a flowery story, but honest, simple details, written with deep feelings. Aunt Hen, my brother finished writing this book a few months ago and printed a few copies to keep in the family. He explained, we want our grandchildren to know about Dad, about you, and about what you have done. This is our gift to you. She read quietly, her eyes stopping at the part where Mr. Phat wrote a handwritten letter, lonely but loving lines that he had never sent. At the end of the book was a photo of the apricot tree in the yard with the message, Thank you, Aunt Han, for keeping our family's spring blooming forever. She closed the book and smiled slightly. Thank you. I don't think I deserve to be told this. The son sat down next to her, his voice warm. Auntie deserves more than that. We grew up, got busy, and didn't understand Dad. But through you, we saw Dad again. Not the strict father we thought, but a man who cherished the little things. You gave us the chance to understand Dad, even though it was late. She looked at him, then turned to the apricot tree in the yard and said softly, Auntie only did what she thought was right. He did the same, he just didn't say it. The conversation lasted until the afternoon fell. Before leaving, he placed the book in her hand. Auntie, keep it. Later, we will bring the children here so they can meet Grandma Han and listen to you tell stories. She nodded, her heart warm. From then on, the small book became a part of her house. Every time her children and grandchildren visited, she would read it to them, not to tell them about herself, but to help them understand Mr. Phat, the silent man who taught her the meaning of attachment. Time continued to pass. Mrs. Han grew older, but her spirit remained as bright as the spring sunshine. Every spring, Mr. Phat's family welcomed her to the city, gathering under the canopy of the now ancient apricot tree. The grandchildren grew up and began to have their own lives, but they did not forget to visit Grandma Han every Tet holiday. One time, the eldest grandchild, now a student, brought her a picture he had drawn himself, a picture of a bright yellow apricot tree in the sun, next to the silhouettes of an old woman and an old man sitting on a wooden chair. "Grandma Han, this is you and Grandpa," he said with a smile. She looked at the picture, her eyes shining with joy. "It's so beautiful, my child. Your grandpa must like it too." The last spring in this story, Mrs. Han no longer had the strength to go to the city. Her health gradually weakened, and her legs were no longer steady enough to care for the apricot tree in the front yard. Mr. Phat's family decided to go back to their hometown to visit her. They brought tea, Tet jam, and a small apricot branch from the tree in the old yard. On the porch, she sat on a chair, surrounded by children, while Mr. Phat's two children stood silently looking at her. "Aunt Han, we're back," the daughters said, her voice choked with emotion. She smiled weakly. "I'm so happy. When you guys come back, I feel like Mr. Phat is here too." That afternoon, they sat with her, telling stories, laughing like a real family. When the sun went down, she gently held her eldest son's hand, whispering, "Is the apricot blossom beautiful this year, son?" He nodded. "Very beautiful, Aunt. The apricot blossom tree is still blooming brilliantly." She closed her eyes, a slight smile on her lips. That night, she passed away peacefully, like a passing spring breeze, leaving Mr. Phat's family with endless regret and gratitude. After Mrs. Han passed away, Mr. Phat's family held a small memorial service at the old house. They placed the book My Van No and the painting of their grandchild next to the apricot blossom tree as a token of gratitude. The apricot blossom tree in the yard still blooms every spring, as proof of the lasting humanity that Mrs. Han had sown. Her life, from an ordinary woman, became a great journey of sacrifice, devotion, and wordless love. After Mrs. Han passed away, the small house in the countryside became quieter than ever. The apricot tree in the front yard still stands there, quietly welcoming the new spring, like a silent friend continuing her story. Mr. Phat's family, despite being busy with their own lives, never forgets to visit this place every Tet holiday. They bring fresh flowers, green tea, and small gifts, placing them in front of the porch as a way to remember her, the woman who became an indispensable part of their lives. The house is now deserted, but the memory of Mrs. Han is still vivid through every branch and every corner of the yard. At the old house in the city, the apricot tree in the yard still blooms brilliantly every year, like an unchanging symbol of the humanity that Mrs. Han planted. Mr. Phat's family kept their promise not to sell the house, turning it into a family gathering place on special occasions. The book My Van No is placed solemnly on the bookshelf in the living room, next to Mr. Phat's photo and the apricot tree painting drawn by his grandchild. The following generations grew up with the story of Grandma Han, not only through their parents' stories, but also through the pages of those books, which recorded the 25-year journey of an ordinary but extraordinary woman. One spring day a few years later, Mr. Phat's eldest son returned to Grandma Han's hometown, bringing his eldest daughter, now a young woman. They stood in front of the apricot tree in the yard, now an ancient tree, its wide canopy shading a corner of the house. "Child, this is where Grandma Han used to live," he said in a warm voice. "She was the one who took care of your grandfather and taught me that family is not just about blood, but about sincere feelings." The little girl looked up at the apricot tree, curiously asking, "Grandma Han is very good, Dad? Why did she stay with Grandpa for so long without getting bored?" He smiled, patting his son's head. "It's not that she's good, it's that she's precious. She loves Grandpa, and Grandpa loves her too in their own way." They sat down on the porch, opened the book My Van No that his younger sister had written. The little girl listened attentively to her father read each page, from the day Mrs. Han entered Mr. Phat's house with her calloused hands to the last springs by the apricot tree. When he read the part where Mr. Phat wrote a handwritten letter, his voice choked up slightly. "Children, please thank Aunt Han on behalf of Dad. She gave Dad a friend." The little girl looked up. "Grandpa is quiet like Dad, isn't he?" He laughed. "Yes, but Grandma Han understands him, just like Dad hopes you will understand Dad." From then on, the apricot tree in front of Mrs. Han's house was not just a souvenir, but became a destination for Mr. Phat's family through the generations. Every spring, they gathered there, bringing their children and grandchildren to tell the story of Grandma and Mr. Phat. Mr. Phat's daughter, now a mother, continued to add new details to the book. The times Mrs. Han told stories to her grandchildren, the gifts from her hometown she brought to the city, and the last moment she held her brother's hand on the porch. The book was no longer just a family memory, but a legacy passed down from generation to generation. Many years later, when Mr. Phat's grandchildren were grown up, one of them, the grandchild who had painted the apricot tree, decided to set up a small memorial corner at the old house in the city. Under the apricot tree, they placed a small stone tablet with the inscription, "In memory of Mr. Phat and Mrs. Hand, the two people who taught us that human love is a flame that never goes out." Next to the tablet is a wooden bench where people can sit, sip tea, and watch the apricot blossoms fall, just like Mrs. Hand and Mr. Phat used to do. The memorial corner is not ostentatious, but enough for anyone who stops by to feel the warmth of their story. The apricot tree in the old yard and the apricot tree in front of Mrs. Hand's house still bloom every spring, like an unwritten promise between her and Mr. Phat. Mr. Phat's family, though increasingly crowded, never forgets the origin of that affection. They teach their children that happiness lies not in what we own, but in what we give. Like how Mrs. Han gave her whole life to take care of a person who was not her blood relative, and received in return a family that goes beyond all conventional definitions. One distant spring day, when the eldest granddaughter of the eldest son, now a young writer, sat under the apricot tree in the old yard, she opened the book My Van No and continued writing a new chapter. She told about the times she visited her grandmother Hanh, about the apricot tree in the front yard, and about how that story inspired her to pursue her dream. At the end of the chapter, she wrote, "Grandma Han did not leave behind any property, but she left behind a family, not of blood, but of heart. And every time the apricot blossoms bloom, I know she is still here, with my grandfather, smiling." The life of Grandma Han, from an ordinary woman struggling to make a living, has become a small legend in the hearts of those who remain. The apricot blossoms still bloom, spring still comes, and her story is forever a song about humanity, about silent sacrifice and eternal respect. As time passes, the story of Grandma Han and Mr. Phat is no longer just a private memory of their family. Thanks to the book My Van No, written by Mr. Phat's daughter, those simple but vibrant lines began to spread out, touching the hearts of many people. Initially, the book was only printed in a few copies for the family, but through the hands of grandchildren and friends, it was gradually shared more widely. One day, a local teacher in Mrs. Han's hometown happened to read it and was moved by the story of devotion and humanity. He brought it to school and read it to his students as a lesson in life values. Since then, My Van No has become an inspirational story in that countryside. Teachers have used it to teach students about patience, respect, and the meaning of living for others. The apricot tree in front of Mrs. Hand's house, now cared for by neighbors after her death, has become a symbol in the village. People call it Mrs. Hand's apricot tree, and every spring, children in the neighborhood gather under the tree, listening to adults tell stories about the woman who devoted her life to caring for someone who was not her blood relative. The story is not just a memory, but has become a small part of the community's culture. In the city, the apricot tree in Mr. Phat's old yard also has a new meaning. The eldest granddaughter, now a young writer, decided to officially publish My Van No, after adding new chapters about Mrs. Han. The book not only recounts her 25-year journey, but also records how she influenced her family and even strangers after her passing. When the book was released, it quickly attracted attention. Readers were not only moved by the story, but also captivated by the profound message. Happiness does not lie in what we receive, but in what we give with all our hearts. One spring day, the young writer held a book launch at her old house. Under the canopy of the Mai tree that has now become an ancient tree, she stood in front of dozens of people, family, friends, and even strangers, to tell the story of Grandma Han and Grandpa Phat. "This is not just about my family," she said, her voice trembling, "but about all of us. Grandma Han taught me that a small act, if done with love, can change a life." When she finished, there was a burst of applause, and everyone's eyes turned to the apricot tree, as if Grandma Han and Mr. Phat were still there, silently witnessing. The book is not just about inspiration. Part of the proceeds from it were used by Mr. Phat's family to set up a small fund called the My Van No Fund. The fund supports disadvantaged women in the community, those who, like Grandma Han when she was young, had to struggle to make a living without support. The eldest son, now middle-aged, said at the fund announcement, "Aunt Han never wanted anything for herself, but we want to use her name to help those in need. This is a way to keep her." Since then, dozens of women have been supported to learn a trade, find jobs, and rebuild their lives, all thanks to the spirit that Ms. Han left behind. The story of Mrs. Han gradually went beyond the borders of the countryside and the city. A young director read My Van No and decided to turn it into a short film. The film did not focus on dramatic details, but depicted Mrs. Han's silence, from her calloused hands making tea every morning to her gentle eyes as she tended to the apricot tree. When the film was screened at a local film festival, the audience was silent. Many people shed tears. An old man in the audience stood up after the screening and said, "I see myself in Mrs. Han. The days of living for others without expecting anything in return. Thank you for telling this story." The apricot tree in front of Mrs. Han's house and the apricot tree in Mr. Phat's yard still bloom every spring, like two witnesses to a story that will never fade. Mr. Phat's family continues to preserve them, not only for their memories, but because they have become symbols of kindness. One day, the young writer returned to her hometown, stood under the apricot tree in front of Mrs. Han's house, and wrote another line in her notebook. Grandma Han not only left behind a family, but also a world where human love blooms forever like apricot blossoms. Many years later, when Mr. Phat's descendants grew up and grew old, the story of Mrs. Han was still told, not only in the family, but also in books, movies, and conversations on the porch. She did not leave behind any property, nor did she leave behind any reputation, but she left behind a priceless legacy, something that money cannot buy. Love and connection between people. Every time spring comes, apricot blossoms bloom, people remember her. A simple woman who lived an extraordinary life with an open heart. In an old photo, he sat there with a calm gaze like every day. Mrs. Han looked at the photo, gently poured a cup of tea, put it on the table, and whispered, "The apricot blossoms this year are very beautiful, Mr. Phat." No one heard her words, but she believed that, even though he was somewhere far away, he still understood. She smiled, her heart lighter than ever. She knew her journey was still going on, but now she was no longer alone, because what she had given with all her heart had now returned to her in the most complete way. Happiness, sometimes, does not lie in what we receive, but in what we have given. And Mrs. Han understood that she had devoted her whole heart to sharing. We would like to express our deep gratitude to you for taking the time to listen to today's story. This is not only a 25-year journey of a person, but also a meaningful lesson about humanity, connection, and values that go beyond material things. Through this story, we want to send a message. True happiness does not come from what we receive, but from what we give with all our heart. Sometimes just a small action, a sincere devotion, is enough to create a deep impression in the life of others. And finally, the most precious thing we receive is respect and sincere feelings. If this story has evoked memorable thoughts and emotions in you, please take a moment to like, share your feelings in the comment section below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other meaningful stories. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue to bring quality content rich in human values. We wish you good health, peace, and happiness. Sincerely, thank you.